In this last slide presentation, I just want to give a brief overview of where we've been in this course and the main topics that we've covered. Keep in mind that the last exam for this course will just be primarily on the last third of class, everything since the second exam, with the exception that I may ask you to think broadly about some big topics from the course. So we began this course considering Mesoamerica as a diverse place, both culturally and geographically, in terms of the plant life, in terms of the animal life, and in terms of the human cultures that developed in pre-Hispanic Mesoamerica. Really, that's kind of one of the main messages of this course. Mesoamerica is not one monolithic culture, just like it's not one monolithic environment, but rather a very diverse collection of societies and traditions. We began, in terms of the archaeology in this class, we began by considering the first peoples who arrived in Mesoamerica. We talked about some of the first sites in the New World entirely throughout all of the Americas that give us evidence for how people arrived, perhaps initially in boats along the Pacific coast. We talked about megafauna and how maybe some of the first Mesoamericans were hunting these large-bodied animals, and how their economy and subsistence and settlement practices reflected that. And we actually have, for example, with Hoyo Negro, that you can see in the upper image on the left, we actually have some human remains from a girl who probably dates to about 13,000 years ago. So we can actually see the first peoples in Mesoamerica in that particular cenote site. The next major time period that we discussed is the Archaic period in Mesoamerica. The Archaic period is really significant, in part because this is the time during which Mesoamericans seem to have been experimenting with lots of different plants and some animals as well, as they began to domesticate different food species. Now, domestication is not the same thing as agriculture, but agriculture wouldn't be possible without this early step of domestication. So archaic sites are a little hard to find in Mesoamerica, as they are anywhere. You've got relatively mobile populations living in ephemeral, relatively temporary, seasonal structures. And so we only have a relatively small sample of Archaic period sites. It appears that there was a sparse population distribution in Mesoamerica, but we can see, for example, they're starting to domesticate maize 9,000 years ago. They had squashes even before that. By the end of the Archaic, they were also domesticating beans, and it was some of these domesticates that really laid the foundations for the rise of agriculture and sedentary populations in the succeeding periods. So the beginning of sedentary life in Mesoamerica is the early formative period. And we talked about the early formative period as when we see true farming arising. Mesoamericans began to use pottery, a technology that they likely in part adopted from Central America and perhaps even Northern South America. And they're using ceramics to make vessels, pottery vessels, for cooking and storing their foods, but also other things like musical instruments, figurines. And in this reconstruction of an early formative period village, you can see they're also, domesticating turkeys. They are, processing maize flour on manos and metates and so forth. So they're starting to settle down into farming villages. And as part of that, we see rising social complexity in the form of offerings that are recovered with burials and so forth. And I also shared with you that it's this early formative period where I focus my own research. This is, I think, a really important time of transition and kind of the origins of Mesoamerican culture as we understand it. Now, as part of that transition, in the succeeding lecture, we talked about the origins of social complexity in a hierarchical sense. And we discussed that the first evidence of chiefdoms that we have in Mesoamerica is found on the Soconusco coast of Chiapas and Guatemala. And so here, for instance, you see various reconstructions of a chiefly house at the Soconusco site of Paso de la Amara. Now, this house was also associated with an early ball court, so we have evidence of the ball game, and the ways in which rising social complexity were developing along the Pacific coast by somewhere around 1600, 1500 Cal BC. The next major topic that we discussed was the shift from social complexity emerging on the Pacific coast to social complexity emerging in the Gulf Coast with the rise of the Olmec by the end of the early formative period. Now, the term shamanism is considered contentious. It was originally, the concept of shamanism was first identified in Siberia, and there are anthropologists who think it's problematic to attribute that specific term to any other cultures. However, I think it is clear to see with the Olmec, regardless of whether or not we use this term, it's clear to see that they had emerging ritual specialists. And so we talked about evidence for the Olmec elite serving as sort of an intermediary between the worlds of the living and the dead. We talked about Nahualism and transformation with the were-jaguar that you can see in the mask in the center. And then we moved on and continued to discuss the Olmec in terms of some major debates that relate to complexity we see emerging here. So, for example, if we stick to a traditional kind of evolutionist framework for understanding social complexity, do the Olmec sort of qualify as a chiefdom or a state? And then in particular, we had a debate about whether or not the mother culture versus sister culture kind of traditional models for how the Olmec influenced the rest of Mesoamerica by the Middle Formative period, which of those two models better fits the evidence? The next topic that we discussed was that influence in the Middle Formative, where you could see social complexity and some elements of Olmec influence and iconography showing up elsewhere, such as here at Chalcatzingo in the highlands of Mexico. And we also discussed kind of a crisis of the end of the early formative period, where it looks as though there was a lot of conflict between these communities, and in part from that conflict we see the emergence of more complex political entities such as Monte Alban. The next lecture that we talked about did cover the origins of the state, places like Monte Alban, which we'll get to in a second, but we were also talking about sacrifice and the relationship of sacrifice to that establishment of formalized complexity. Now, when we talk about sacrifice in Mesoamerica, we often immediately think of human sacrifice, where you can see, the reconstruction of these Aztec priests on the right here performing a human heart sacrifice. But I really tried to push in this course that sacrifice is a broader philosophical concept, and you can see that in the image on the left from the Mixtec codices. Sacrifice could be the burning of copal incense. It could be the offering of maybe some sacrificed animals, or even someone bringing textiles, or someone bringing surplus foods or specialty foods such as fermented cacao beverages. Basically, the concept is sacrifice is a sacred agreement, a covenant between commoners, nobles, and spiritual forces and deities and so forth. So I really tried to push that both in your papers and in our discussions in this course. We then took a bit more of a chronological sort of progression through particular powerful city-states that emerged in Mesoamerica. And I made the case to you that the first widely agreed upon state-level society to emerge in Mesoamerica came about in the highlands of Oaxaca with the site of Monte Alban. And to tie it into our previous topics, we did discuss how, for example, the danzante and conquest slab carved stones at Monte Alban seem to suggest that sacrifice and the display of sacrificial rituals in front of a large crowd of people probably gathered in the central plaza that you can see to the right formed part of this sort of constellation of emerging complexity that is established with early state societies like that at Monte Alban. We then moved on to an even bigger and more impressive site that emerged right at the end of the formative period and then really kind of reached its apex in the Classic with Teotihuacan in central Mexico. Teotihuacan is a really fascinating and huge urban site, also very mysterious. We're still not sure who built it. We covered some of the major architectural features. We talked about the Pyramid of the Moon and the Sun that you can see in the image on the right, as well as the Avenue of the Dead. And then I think perhaps even a better kind of symbol for the emergence of Teotihuacan might be the Temple of Quetzalcoatl and the sacrifices, as well as the kind of remodeling and even hiding of the architecture at this temple. And you could see that building as it is today in the image on the left. Next, we continued our chronological progression into the Classic period and discussed how Monte Alban sort of reached its apex in the Classic, as well as the degree to which and the evidence for interaction between Monte Alban and other powerful places, particularly Teotihuacan. We then moved on to discuss Classic period Teotihuacan, both in terms of how it reached its apex, as well as some interesting new evidence that's emerging right now for potentially a larger Maya influence at Teotihuacan, or maybe a Maya kind of a barrio community of people from the Maya region that lived at Teotihuacan. And then we also discussed the evidence of collapse at Teotihuacan, though we will get to that in a few slides when we talk about the Classic period collapse. We then kind of returned to a more topical approach, and we discussed Mesoamerican calendars and writing systems, and in particular, I discussed the diversity of these. I gave you kind of an overview, and we did discuss how they're related, how in fact the writing system seems to kind of emerge out of the calendar, and that the concept of counting, the concept of watching the skies and measuring the length of days and the movement of the sun and so forth really seems to be a foundational concept in Mesoamerican cosmology, or how the Mesoamericans understood their universe. We then discussed the Maya, and we spent a couple of lectures going over some major Maya sites, as well as how the Maya kind of related to the other Mesoamericans we discussed. And one of my favorite things that we emphasize in that lecture is some of the major myths about the Maya. For example, that the Maya are all gone now, when in fact there are millions of Maya people still alive. Also that the Maya were sort of one group of people, when in fact there are many different groups of people with related languages. And we also talked about some other kind of major myths that have emerged about the Maya. Next, we discussed the Classic period collapse and the Epiclassic period. And you can see, for example, in this image, a Classic period Maya site where they have started to build a defensive wall around the site. So this was a time of emerging conflict, a time of instability as the established ruling lineages started to crumble. But it wasn't the end of all urban life in Mesoamerica at the end of the Classic. We talked about how right at the end of the Classic period and into the early post-Classic, we have the continuation of some urban traditions, the emergence of some new societies, albeit with smaller sites, but with perhaps some increasing evidence of long-distance interaction and maybe the influence of religious cults that seem to be showing, for example, contact between Central Mexico rather, with the site of Tula, and then the site of Chichen Itza down on the Yucatan Peninsula. Finally, toward the end of the course, we discussed the famous Aztec Empire and the emergence of the Aztecs. We talked about sort of the Aztec creation stories, how the people marched down from the north, from Aztlan, the sacred origin place of the Mexica people, and then established their site of Tenochtitlan, according to the legends, at the place where the eagle was holding the serpent in its beak perched on a cactus in the middle of a lake, which you can see on the modern Mexican flag. We also discussed some other complexities and really intricate details of Aztec religion. For example, the interesting story of Huitzilopochtli, the Aztec warrior god, sort of a personified hummingbird, who also, that's also the name applied to the priest that brought the Mexica people down from Aztlan. And the really interesting story where Huitzilopochtli is born ready for battle. He defeats his elder siblings and sort of goes on to become a central figure in Aztec religion. And in fact, his battle to get the sun to move across the sky every day became sort of a justification for human sacrifice in the growing Aztec Empire. We then also discussed life in Tenochtitlan, the sort of greatest, most urban, most cosmopolitan of Mesoamerican cities, and also the one about which the Western world knows the most, because it was the one that Spaniards actually saw as they began to perpetuate the conquest. But as part of this discussion, I really also wanted to emphasize the conquest wasn't just the result of guns, germs, and steel, and how Europeans were somehow both technologically superior but also resistant to diseases. That's not enough to explain conquest. Instead, native politics played a big role here with, for example, tens of thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors helping the Spaniards to perpetuate the conquest. And it was with that story of conquest that we ended the course. This is a horrible moment in human history. Depending on how you look at it, it may be one of the greatest moments of human suffering in all of history that we are aware of. And yet, I also tried to emphasize kind of a sense of some optimism at the end of this course, because the project of conquest, the project of defeating Mesoamerican culture, the project of rendering all Mesoamerican indigenous peoples into slavery and converting them into a different religion and so forth, as disastrous and as broad-reaching as that project was, I argued in this course that it was never fully completed. There's still a great deal of Mesoamerican indigenous blood and indigenous language and indigenous culture remaining in Mesoamerica. For example, where I work in Oaxaca, there are 16 different ethno-linguistic groups recognized by the Mexican government that speak indigenous languages. So there's still a lot of indigenous diversity that has not been crushed. For example, millions of people still speak some of the Mayan languages. So I just wanted to leave a little bit of that sense of optimism, a sense of perseverance and persistence of this beautifully complex native culture of Mesoamerica. So thank you very much for your attention and for participating in this course. And I hope that at the very least, it's given you a glimpse of some of the diversity in this really fascinating place and time in the world's history.